So my name is Gabriel Demarco. I am the enologist and viticulturalist at Cave Spring Cellars in Jordan, Ontario. Our winery is in Jordan and the vineyards are 7 kilometers away from the winery in Beamsville, west of the winery.
My name is Marco Giullioli. I'm the winemaker in La Guardiense cooperative. We are talking about a winery which is the biggest winery in Campania region. It's 1,000 member, 1,500 hectares. It's the biggest producer of Falanghina. Falanghina is the main variety for us. It's really our most important variety, our biggest challenge, and we just try to let people understand how is the potential of Falanghina.
Well, Riesling is so fascinating for me is in that it expresses differently apart from other varieties. All varieties express differently from where they're from and from the different soils, but Riesling in particular shows quite differently depending on the soil it is grown and the terroir in which it's grown in. And so what that does in Ontario, where it does very well, is allows for stylistic differences in the wine we make, different pHs, different acidities, and it makes it very fun to work with. And that's the magic of winemaking, really.
So Falanghina is really an exciting and amazing variety, especially because of its very high acidity, which is typical for the variety and quite typical from the region. This variety is very versatile. It helps us to produce many different kind of wines because of those characteristics. It's also a very fruity wine, and we also experimenting the long-lasting potential of this variety during years.
Currently at Cave Spring, I could be off by wine or two here, but I believe we're at nine Rieslings, and we're going to be doing a sparkling Riesling traditional method, so I'll say 10. Yep. So starting from the CSV Riesling, which stands for Cave Spring Vineyard, is a selection of our oldest vines and the best parcels of Riesling within those oldest vines, to working all the way through the portfolio, Estate Riesling, Dolomite Riesling, Riesling Niagara Peninsula Riesling Dry, and those are all table Rieslings along with sort of the Adam step. I mean, this was a single vineyard Riesling from our oldest vineyard block planted by Len when he started the winery. Ice wine, Indian summer, both sweet wines, sparkling wine to come, and to touch on the point again is just that Riesling is able to do that so well in all styles.
Now, thanks to the acidity, which is really typical of the variety, and thanks to our terroir, which help us to have different kind of grapes, we can really produce several kind of wines. We usually start from the sparkling wines that come from the lower part of the valley because of the right level between pH and acidity. You got a very performing Charmat method, but at the same time, if you select the best parcels, you can also produce a great Champenois method. So we're really working on the sparkling wines with Falanghina, which are performing very well. Then obviously we have the still wines, which are so important because Falanghina is known all over the world as a still wine. But what we are really doing now is trying to produce a still wine of Falanghina, which is a long aging wine. That is really a challenge because, you know, Falanghina has never been done as a long-lasting wine, but because of the new approach to the viticulture, different protocol, with a different knowledge of the variety, we can really produce a wine that can last for many years. And then at the end, there is the passito wines. Passito wines are possible because always of the acidity. So you can dry the grapes, using the sun usually, because it's our main strength, that help us to concentrate the sugar, but at the same time, because of the very important acidity, you can have a very balanced, sweet passito wine.
Positively, it performed exceptionally well in the number one adverse condition for success in Ontario, which is winter. Now, the Niagara Peninsula is exceptionally protected as a mesoclimate. I think would be the exact term for what we have in the peninsula. But we still have cold winters, and the Riesling is very winter hardy. It also starts its growth cycle late, so what we say breaks bud. So when the buds that hold the growth start to bloom, start to kind of come out of their hibernation, for lack of a better term, it does that late. So what that means is basically frost risk is in the past, so that's not something you have to worry about. And what it does poorly is, or has a tendency to do poorly, is it has a tendency to break down late in the season. So it's their big, tight clusters, and if you have, say, a wet vintage, so the Riesling, especially the varieties all behave differently, but Riesling likes to take up water when it rains. So in late season, when the clusters are tight and the skins are soft, if you have, say, a big rain, you risk having like breakdown problems where the clusters actually start to kind of fall apart, and then that leads to infection, and then you have to play it every day at a time at that point.
The Falanghina is a variety that's expressed really in different ways in relation to the area it which come from. If we refer to the lower part of the valley from which our Falanghina come from, the production is very high, so that could be a problem, obviously. So you have vineyards which have a lot of water available in the position in which they are, and they produce quite a lot quantity of grapes. So you really need to manage it. It's quite an hard challenge. But as soon as you move to the hilly area of the valley, then everything changes, because the water available for the vine naturally is not so much. So the vines react in a completely different way, and the viticulture change a lot. That helps us to produce really different kind of wines from the same valley.
Well, we like to say at Cave Spring that vineyard first, and we try not to mess it up in the winery. So in the winery, we press it, we ferment it cool for the most part. I mean, there's always variations in winemaking style and techniques, but for the most part, cool fermentations, some like extended lees contact for some texture and mouthfeel. But that's really, we just really work with what we get from the vineyard, so as little as possible, really, outside of the processes of winemaking.
The vinification of Falanghina is very exciting, but at the end I could say that it's also quite simple. I mean, there is a very important thing you need to care. The most important point is just to avoid oxidation. So you need to be very careful, you need to concentrate, especially on the first phases of the vinification, just to avoid any oxidative problem. If you're able to maintain all the potential of this variety until the glass, then this variety is really an extraordinary variety.
Yeah, it's you can both answer that question academically, and you can answer that question from taste. It translates academically by looking at, say, pH and TA. If you were to put the wines from two different terroirs in front of a group of trained panel tasters, they would pick out flavors and textures, and if you put them in a graph, they would show separately. And that's been proven, which is quite fascinating to see, and the only difference being the vineyard site. In the cellar, we find that vineyards from our Beamsville site, wines from our vineyard in the Beamsville bench have a focused attention, acidity seam to them. They show fruity and aromatic, and when you put them in your palate, the acidity just like there's almost like there's a tension to the wine that is from terroir. That when we try Rieslings from other vineyard sites, they're not there, or it is not there. So.
Now, Falanghina, it's really a variety that is able to do, let me say, special things. We can find Falanghina in Campania region, especially in two different areas. The first area, the historical one, is the Sannio Valley. We are talking about the inland. So we're not talking about Campania close to the seaside. The second place is Falanghina that come from the Campi Flegrei, which is an area very close to the coast. Now the two Falanghinas really are two different wines because of the soil from which they come from. They produce wines with completely different characteristics. Now the wine that comes from the sea coast, the seaside, is basically a more sweeter wine. It's quite a ripe variety. The wine that comes from the inland, we are talking about Sannio, the famous Falanghina del Sannio, is basically extremely fresh. That's also because that area, that particular area, even if we are in Campania region, in the south of Italy, is not really a warm area. It's quite a cool area. It's surrounded by very high mountains that help us to keep the freshness, help us to have a great exchange of temperature during the summer nights. So during the days we have quite high temperature, but during the nights in summer the temperature goes down a lot. That helps us really to produce very fresh and long-lasting wines in the valley of Sannio.
Falanghina is tough competitor. The acidity is there, fruit's there. It can make so many different wine styles. It's a formidable foe. I love it, actually. It's one of the varieties I found early in my wine adventures, and to do a comparison with Falanghina and Riesling is a treat. And this be with a winemaker, one of the top Falanghina winemakers in the world, was yet another treat to talk about the differences between the growth patterns in the vineyard and the things that you have to deal with in the winery. It was a special occasion.
Now Riesling, it's also another really interesting variety. Riesling altogether with Chardonnay, maybe with Pinot Noir, the most important variety all over the world. You can find this variety really everywhere. Now it's exciting how this variety, and Riesling is one of them, react in a different way in relation obviously to the area from which they come from. This area, the Riesling that we tasted from this area, we are talking about a very high latitude area that is quite unusual, especially with this low temperature that we have in this area. Makes wines with a different acidity profile, with a different aromas, and also the right balance with sugar help them to produce a wine which is really performing and exciting, also because it comes from a very cool area and unusual area for wine production, considering from the old world point of view.